ईश्वराम्बा सुतश्रीमन् पूर्वा सन्ध्या प्रवर्तते उत्तिष्ठ सत्यसाईशा कर्तव्यं दैवमान्हिकम् उत्तिष्ठोत्तिष्ठ तर्तीशा उत्तिष्ठ जगदीपते उत्तिष्ठ करुणापूर्णा लोकमङ्गलसिद्धये चित्रावती तटविशाल सुशान्तसौधे तिष्ठन्ति सेवकजनास्तव दर्शनार्थम् आदित्यकान्तिरनुभाति समस्तलोकान् श्री सत्यसाई भगवन् तव सुप्रभातम् त्वन्नामकीर्तनरतास्तव दिव्यनामा गायन्ति भक्तिरसपान प्रहृष्टचित्ताः धातुं कृपासहित दर्शनमाशु तेभ्यः श्री सत्यसाई भगवन् तव सुप्रभातम् आदाय दिव्यकुसुमाणि मनोहराणि श्रीपादपूजनविधिं भवदङ्घ्रिमूले कर्तुं महोत्सुकतया प्रविशन्ति भक्ताः श्री सत्यसाई भगवन् तव सुप्रभातम् देशान्तरागतबुधास्तव दिव्यमूर्तिम् सन्दर्शनाभिरतिसंयुत चित्तवृत्त्याः वेदोक्तमन्त्रपठनेन लसन्त्यजस्त्रम् श्री सत्यसाई भगवन् तव सुप्रभातम् श्रुत्वा तवाद्भुतचरित्रमखण्डकीर्तिम् व्याप्तां दिगन्तरविशाल धरातलेऽस्मिन् जिज्ञासुलोकमुपतिष्ठति चाश्रमेऽस्मिन् श्री सत्यसाई भगवन् तव सुप्रभातम् सीता सती समविशुद्धहृदम्बुजाक्षी जाता बह्वं गणाकरगृहीत सुपुष्पहाराः स्तुवन्ति दिव्यनुतिभिः फणिभूषणं त्वां श्रेये सत्यसाई भगवन् तव सुप्रभातम् सुप्रभातमिदं पुण्यं ये पठन्ति दिने दिने ते विशन्ति परं धाम ज्ञानविज्ञानशोभिताः मङ्गलं गुरुदेवाय मङ्गलं ज्ञानदायिने मङ्गलं पतिवासाय मङ्गलं सत्यसायिने।
भगवान् श्री सत्य साई बाबाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सत्य स्वरूपाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सत्य धर्मपरायणाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई वरदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सत्पुरुषाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सत्यगुणात्मने नमः। ॐ श्री साई साधुवर्धनाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई साधुजनपोषणाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वज्ञाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वजनप्रियाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वशक्तिमूर्तये नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वेशाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वसङ्गपरित्यागिने नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वान्तर्यामिने नमः। ॐ श्री साई महिमात्मने नमः। ॐ श्री साई महेश्वरस्वरूपाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई पर्तिग्रामोद्भवाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई पर्तिक्षेत्रनिवासिने नमः। ॐ श्री साई यशक्काय शिरडिवासिने नमः। ॐ श्री साई जोडि आदिपल्लि सोमप्पाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई भारद्वाज ऋषिगोत्राय नमः। ॐ श्री साई भक्तवत्सलाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई अपान्तरात्मने नमः। ॐ श्री साई अवतारमूर्तये नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वभयनिवारिणे नमः। ॐ श्री साई आपस्तम्भसूत्राय नमः। ॐ श्री साई अभयप्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई रत्नाकरवंशोद्भवाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई शिरडि साई अभेदशक्त्यावताराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई शङ्कराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई शिरडि साई मूर्तये नमः। ॐ श्री साई द्वारकामायि वासिने नमः। ॐ श्री साई चित्रावती तटपुट्टपर्तिविहारिणे नमः। ॐ श्री साई शक्तिप्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई शरणागतत्राणाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई आनन्दाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई आनन्ददाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई आर्तत्राणपरायणाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई अनाथनाथाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई असहाय सहायाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई लोकबान्धवाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई लोकरक्षापरायणाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई लोकनाथाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई दीनजनपोषणाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई मूर्तित्रयस्वरूपाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई मुक्तिप्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई कलुषविदूराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई करुणाकराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वाधाराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वहृद्वासिने नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वपुण्यफलप्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वपापक्षयकराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वरोगनिवारिणे नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वबाधहराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई अनन्तनुतकर्तृणे नमः। ॐ श्री साई आदिपुरुषाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई आदिशक्तये नमः। ॐ श्री साई अपरूपशक्तिने नमः। ॐ श्री साई अव्यक्तरूपिणे नमः। ॐ श्री साई कामक्रोधध्वंसिने नमः। ॐ श्री साई कनकाम्बरधारिणे नमः। ॐ श्री साई अद्भुतचर्याय नमः। ॐ श्री साई आपद्बान्धवाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई प्रेमात्मने नमः। ॐ श्री साई प्रेममूर्तये नमः। ॐ श्री साई प्रेमप्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई प्रियाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई भक्तप्रियाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई भक्तमन्दाराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई भक्तजनहृदयविहाराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई भक्तजनहृदयालयाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई भक्तपराधीनाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई भक्तिज्ञानप्रदीपाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई भक्तिज्ञानप्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सुज्ञानमार्गदर्शकाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई ज्ञानस्वरूपाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई गीताबोधकाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई ज्ञानसिद्धिदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सुन्दररूपाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई पुण्यपुरुषाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई फलप्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई अतीताय नमः। ॐ श्री साई पुराणपुरुषाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई कालातीताय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सिद्धिरूपाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सिद्धसङ्कल्पाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई आरोग्यप्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई अन्नवस्त्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई संसारदुःखक्षयकराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वाभीष्टप्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई कल्याणगुणाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई कर्मध्वंसिने नमः। ॐ श्री साई साधुमानसशोभिताय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वमतसम्मताय नमः। ॐ श्री साई साधुमानस परिशोधकाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई साधकानुग्रह वटवृक्ष प्रतिष्ठापकाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सकल संशयहराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सकल तत्त्वबोधकाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई योगीश्वराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई योगीन्द्रवन्दिताय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वमङ्गलकराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई सर्वसिद्धिप्रदाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई आपन्निवारिणे नमः। ॐ श्री साई आर्तिहराय नमः। ॐ श्री साई शान्तमूर्तये नमः। ॐ श्री साई सुलभप्रसन्नाय नमः। ॐ श्री साई भगवान् श्री सत्य साई बाबाय नमः। शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ॐ। गणानां त्वा गणपतिगुं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणस्पत आनशृण्वन्नोतिभिः सीदसादनम्। प्रणो देवी सरस्वती वाजेभिर्वाजिनीवती धीनामवित्रयवतु। गणेशाय नमः। सरस्वत्यै नमः। श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ॐ। ॐ नमो भगवते रुद्राय। ॐ नमस्ते रुद्रमन्यव उतोत इषवे नमः। नमस्ते अस्तु धन्वने बाहुभ्यामुत ते नमः। यात इषुः शिवतमा शिवं बभूव ते धनुः। शिवा शरव्या यातवतया नो रुद्रमृडय। या ते रुद्रशिवा तनूरघोरा पापकाशिनी। तया नस्तनुवाशन्तमया गिरिशन्ताभिचाकचीः। यामिषुं गिरिशन्तहस्ते बिभर्षस्तवे। शिवां गिरित्रतां कुरु माहि गुंसीः पुरुषं जगत्। शिवेन वचसा त्वा गिरिशाच्छावदामसि। यथा नः सर्वमिज्जगदयक्ष्मगुं सुमना असत्। अध्यवोचदधिवक्ता प्रथमो दैव्योऽभिषक्। अहीघश्च सर्वान् जम्भयन् सर्वा आश्च यातु धान्यः। असौ यस्ताम्रो अरुण उत बभ्रुः सुमङ्गलः। ये चेमागुन् रुद्रा अभितो दिक्षु श्रिता सहस्रशो वैशागुं हेडईमहे। असौ यो वसर्पति नीलग्रीवो विलोहितः। उतैनं गोपा अदृशन्नदृशन्नुदहार्यः। उतैनं विश्वा भूतानि सदृष्टो मृडयातिनः। नमो अस्तु नीलग्रीवाय सहस्राक्षाय मीढुषे। अथो ये अस्य सत्त्वानो हन्तेभ्यो करन्नमः। प्रमुञ्च धन्वनस्त्वमुभयोरात्नियोर्जाम्। याश्च ते हस्त इषवः पराता भगवो वप। अवतत्य धनुस्त्वगुं सहस्राक्षशते शुधे निशीर्य शल्यानां मुखा शिवो नः सुमना भव विज्जन्दनुः कपर्दिनो विशल्यो बाणवागुम् उत अनेशन्नस्येषव आभुरस्य निषङ्गतिः या ते हेतिर्मीधुष्टमहस्ते बभूव ते धनुः तयास्मान् विश्वतस्त्वमयक्ष्मया परिभुज नमस्ते अस्त्वायुधाय नातताय धृष्णवे उभाभ्यामुत ते नमो बाहुभ्यां तव धन्वने परिते धन्वनो हेतिरस्मान् ऋणक्तु विश्वतः अथो य इषुधिस्तवारे अस्मन्निदेहितम् सहस्राणि सहस्रशो ये रुद्राधिभूम्या तेषागुं सहस्रयोजने वधन्वानि तन्मसि अस्मिन्महत्यर्णवे एन्तरिक्षे भवा अधि नीलग्रीवा शितिकण्ठा शर्वा अधः क्षमाचराः नीलग्रीवा शितिकण्ठादिवगुं रुद्रा उपश्रिताः ये वृक्षेषु सस्पिञ्जरा नीलग्रीवा विलोहिताः ये भूतानामधिपतयो विशिखासः कपर्दिनः ये अन्येषु विविध्यन्ति पात्रेषु पिबतो जनान् ये पथां पथि रक्षय ऐलभृदायव्युधः ये तीर्थानि प्रचरन्ति सृकावन्तो निषङ्गिणः य एतावन्तश्च भूयागुंसश्च दिशो रुद्रावितस्थिरे तेषागुं सहस्रयोजने वधन्वानि तन्मसि नमो रुद्रेभ्यो ये पृथिव्यां ये एन्तरिक्षे ये दिवि ये शामन्नं वातो वर्षमिषवस्तेभ्यो दशः प्राचीर् दश दक्षिणा दशः प्रतीचीर् दशोदीचीर् दशोर्त्वास्तेभ्यो नमस्ते नो मृडयन्तु तेयं विष्मो यश्च नो द्वेष्टितं वोजम्भे दधामि त्र्यम्बकं यजामहे सुगन्धिं पुष्टिवर्धनम् उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनान् मृत्योर्मुक्षीयमामृतात् यो रुद्रो अग्नौ यो अप्सु य ओषधीषु यो रुद्रो विश्वाभुवन विवेश तस्मै रुद्राय नमो अस्तु तमुष्टु हि यस्विषुः सुधन्वायो विश्वस्य क्षयति भेषजस्य यक्ष्वा महे सौ मनसाय रुद्रं नमो भिर्देवमसुरं दुवस्य अयं मे हस्तो भगवान् अयं मे भगवत्तरः अयं मे विश्वभे एषजो यगुं शिवाभिमर्शनः ये ते सहस्रमयुतं पाशामृत्यो मर्त्याय हन्तवे तान्यज्ञस्य मायया सर्वानवयजामहे मृत्यवे स्वाहा प्राणानां ग्रन्थिरसि रुद्रो मा विशान्तकः तेनान्नेनाप्यायस्व ॐ नमो भगवते रुद्राय विष्णवे मृत्युर्मे पाहि ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ निधनपतये नमः निधनपतान्तिकाय नमः ऊर्ध्वाय नमः ऊर्ध्वलिङ्गाय नमः हिरण्याय नमः हिरण्यलिङ्गाय नमः सुवर्णाय नमः सुवर्णलिङ्गाय नमः दिव्याय नमः दिव्यलिङ्गाय नमः भवाय नमः भवलिङ्गाय नमः शर्वाय नमः शर्वलिङ्गाय नमः शिवाय नमः शिवलिङ्गाय नमः ज्वलाय नमः ज्वललिङ्गाय नमः आत्माय नमः आत्मलिङ्गाय नमः परमाय नमः परमलिङ्गाय नमः एतत् सोमस्य सूर्यस्य सर्वलिङ्गगु स्थापयति पाणिमन्त्रं पवित्रम् सद्यो जातं प्रपद्यामि सद्यो जाताय वै नमो नमः भवे भवेनाति भवे भवस्व मां भवोद्भवाय नमः वामदेवाय नमो ज्येष्ठाय नमः श्रेष्ठाय नमो रुद्राय नमः कालाय नमः कलविकरणाय नमो बलविकरणाय नमो बलाय नमो बलप्रमथनाय नमः सर्वभूतदमनाय नमो मनोन्मनाय नमः अघोरेभ्योऽथ घोरेभ्यो घोरघोरतरेभ्यः सर्वेभ्यः सर्वशर्वेभ्यो नमस्ते अस्तु रुद्ररूपेभ्यः तत्पुरुषाय विद्महे महादेवाय धीमहि तन्नो रुद्रः प्रचोदयात् ईशानः सर्वविद्यानाम् ईश्वरः सर्वभूतानां ब्रह्माधिपतिर्ब्रह्मणोऽधिपतिर्ब्रह्मा शिवो मे अस्तु सदा शिवोम् नमो हिरण्यबाहवे हिरण्यवर्णाय हिरण्यरूपाय हिरण्यपतये अम्बिकापतये उमापतये पशुपतये नमो नमः ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः यदक्षरपदभ्रष्टं मात्राहीनं तु यद्भवेत् तत्सर्वं क्षम्यतां देव नारायण नमोऽस्तु ते विसर्गबिन्दुमात्राणि पदपादाक्षराणि च न्यूनानि चातिरिक्तानि क्षमस्व साईश्वर अपराधसहस्राणि क्रियन्ते हर्निशं मया दासोऽयमिति मां मत्वा क्षमस्व साईश्वर अन्यथा शरणं नास्ति त्वमेव शरणं मम तस्मात् कारुण्यभावेन रक्ष रक्ष साईश्वर हरिः ॐ तत्सत् श्री साईश्वरार्पणमस्तु स्वस्तिः प्रजाभ्यः परिपालयन्ताम् न्यायेन मार्गेण महीमहीषाः गोब्राह्मणेभ्यः शुभमस्तु नित्यम् समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
भरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं अनेकदन्तं पाहि गजानन दीनावना पाहि गजानन दीनावना सिन्धुरवदना श्रितजनपालना
देवदेवोत्तम दीन संरक्षक देवदेवोत्तम दीन संरक्षक
साई राम साई श्याम मेरे साई राम। साई राम साई श्याम मेरे साई राम। मेरे साई मेरे बाबा मेरे प्राणनाथ राम। मेरे साई मेरे बाबा मेरे प्राणनाथ साई राम साई श्याम मेरे साई राम। तेरे द्वार पे मैं आऊं मुझे शांति दो भगवान। तेरे द्वार पे मैं आऊं मुझे शांति दो भगवान। मुझे शांति दो भगवान। मुझे शांति दो भगवान। मेरे जीवन में साथ रहो साई नाथ हे। मेरे जीवन में साथ रहो साई नाथ हे। साई राम साई श्याम मेरे साई राम। मेरे साई मेरे बाबा मेरे प्राणनाथ राम। साई राम साई श्याम मेरे साई राम। तेरे द्वार पे मैं साई राम साई श्याम मेरे साई राम।
जननी साई देवी दयामयी, जननी साई देवी दयामयी, जननी साई देवी दयामयी, जननी साई देवी दयामयी, जननी माँ
मुझे दर्श दिखाओ भगवान। मुझे दर्श दिखाओ भगवान। हे साईनाथ भगवान। हे साईनाथ मुझे दर्श दिखाओ भगवान। तुम जानत सब अंतर्यामी। तुम जानत सब अंतर्यामी। दीजो मेरे प्रभु अमृत वाणी। दीजो मेरे प्रभु अमृत वाणी। तुम हो मेरे आत्माराम बाबा। पूर्ण करो मेरे मन के काम बाबा। पूर्ण करो मेरे मन के काम बाबा। मुझे दर्श दिखाओ भगवान। हे साईनाथ भगवान। मुझे दर्श दिखाओ भगवान। तुम जानत सब अंतर्यामी। दीजो मेरे प्रभु अमृत वाणी। तुम हो मेरे आत्माराम बाबा। पूर्ण करो मेरे मन के काम बाबा। पूर्ण करो मेरे मन के काम बाबा। मुझे दर्श दिखाओ भगवान।
ओ बाबा साई बाबा। दुख हरते बाबा। राम ही बाबा कृष्ण ही बाबा, नरक ही नारायण बाबा, नारायण बाबा, नरक ही नारायण बाबा, नरक ही नारायण बाबा, नरक ही नारायण बाबा। ओ बाबा साई बाबा, ओ बाबा आनंद बाबा, ओ बाबा साई बाबा, ओ बाबा साई बाबा।
ॐ तत्सत् श्रीनारायण तु पुरुषोत्तम गुरुतो सिद्धबोधतो स्कन्दविनायक सविता पावकतो, सविता पावकतो, ब्रह्मवदतो यहोवा शक्तितो येषु पिता प्रभुतो, रुद्रविश्वतो रामकृष्णतो रहीमतावतो, रहीमतावतो, वासुदेवगो विश्वरूपतो चिदानन्द हरितो, आदितीयतो अकाल देवै आत्मलिङ्ग शिवतो, आत्मलिङ्ग शिवतो, आत्मलिङ्ग शिवतो। ॐ जय जगदीश हरे स्वामी सत्य साई हरे, भक्तजना संरक्षक, भक्तजना संरक्षक अति महेश्वरा। ॐ जय जगदीश हरे, शशिवदनाधिकरा सर्वा प्राणपते स्वामी सर्वा प्राणपते, आश्रित कल्पलतिका, आश्रित कल्पलतिका आवद्बान्धवा। ॐ जय जगदीश हरे, माता-पिता गुरुदेवमु मर्यन्तयो नीवे स्वामी मर्यन्तयो नीवे, नाद ब्रह्म जगन्नाथा, नाद ब्रह्म जगन्नाथा, नागेन्द्र शयना। ॐ जय जगदीश हरे, ओंकार रूप ओजस्वी ओ साई महादेवा, सत्य साई महादेवा, मंगल आरती अंदुको, मंगल आरती अंदुको, मंदर गिरिधारी। ॐ जय जगदीश हरे, नारायण नारायण ॐ सत्य नारायण 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 ॐ नारायण नारायण ॐ सत्य नारायण नारायण ॐ सत्य नारायण नारायण ॐ जय सद्गुरुदेवा, नारायण नारायण ॐ सत्य नारायण 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 ॐ नारायण नारायण ॐ सत्य नारायण नारायण ॐ सत्य नारायण नारायण ॐ जय सद्गुरुदेवा। शांति शांति शांतिः परमं पवित्रं भावाविभूतिं परमं विचित्रं लीलाविभूतिं परमार्थ इष्टार्थ मोक्षप्रदातं भावाविभूतिम् इदमाश्रयामि साई बाबा विभूतिम् idamaśrayami sacred as miraculous Baba's creation flowing from his blessed hand holy creation granting us the greatest wealth God's divine protection beloved Baba grant us liberation beloved Baba grant us liberation beloved Baba grant us liberation Asato ma Satgamaya Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. समस्त लोका सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्त लोका सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्त लोका सुखिनो भवन्तु शांति 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 जय बोलो भगवान श्री सत्य साई बाबा जी की जय
the fragrance of selfless love that has drawn the world into one family. The truth of an eternal message that has been revealed through every act and word. The fulfillment in service that has been taught by relentless sacrifice. The Lord's own life is indeed His message.
Sai Ram, and welcome to the second episode in our special teleseries entitled The Message of the Lord. Just to recall, this series offers the essence of the teachings of Bhagawan Baba in the context of today's world, especially the various critical problems that humanity currently faces. Last time, we began with the historic date 20th of October 1940, the day on which Baba, then a young 14-year-old, left school and family to serve humanity. After that, we went into a flashback mode, and starting with the incarnation on 23rd November 1926, came up to the 25th birthday in 1950, when Swami formally inaugurated what was then popularly called the new mandir. Back in those early days, devotees thought of the mandir in Prashanti Nilayam merely as a permanent replacement for the tin shed that earlier served as Swami's residence, with adequate space now for regular public darshans. That it certainly was. But few realized that this would also be Swami's headquarters for a mind-boggling mission that would be quietly unveiled, slowly and in stages, without much fanfare. The mission unfolded to reveal its amazing scope and dimensions. However, the message behind the mission continues to be largely missed, which is why the main focus of this series is the message, presented of course with glimpses of his mission as well.
Let us pick up from the point where the so-called New Mandir was formally inaugurated on 23rd November 1950. Almost the very first thing that Swami did was to offer daily darshan, in fact, twice a day. Along with darshan, bhajan singing too became an integral part of daily routine and has remained so ever since, indeed right up to the present time. Word spread, and though Puttaparthi was not easily accessible, the crowds came every day without fail. The devotees who came managed with their self-created temporary shelters. Many even lived under trees and bore many difficulties, all because they wanted to enjoy the bliss of darshan. Every day, a lucky few began to be called for the famous interview, when they could experience divine bliss exclusively and at very close quarters. All this was, of course, with a deep purpose. God comes down in human form mainly to lift humans to the level of God. It is an act of supreme compassion. As Swami himself once described it, it is like a mother bending down to pick up her child and holding it close to her. Right from the early days, Baba systematically and consistently stressed the sublime and highest aspects of spirituality rather than religion. Since the Vedas, which represent an integral part of ancient India, extol the highest aspects of spirituality, Swami began to take keen interest in promoting the revival of interest in the Vedas, especially because public interest in them was beginning to decline, thanks to lifestyle changes brought about by the industrialization of India. Swami began to interact frequently with Vedic scholars. Initially, many of these scholars were rather skeptical about Swami's knowledge of the Vedas. However, after initial doubts, all Vedic scholars unreservedly accepted that Swami was indeed the very personification of the Vedas. One outstanding Vedic scholar who accepted Swami's divinity without any reservation was the late Sri Kamavadhani. Once Kamavadhani came to Baba. He stayed with him till he passed away at the ripe old age of 100. On Swami's instructions, Sri Kamavadhani began tutoring students and other seekers in Vedic chanting. If one sees extensive Vedic chanting by Swami's students these days, it is all due to the pioneering efforts of Kamavadhani made a long time ago. Interestingly, these days one can, on occasions, see even overseas devotees chanting the Vedas with great enthusiasm. Swami no doubt actively encourages the chanting of the Vedas. At the same time, he is equally insistent that mere chanting would not do. Rather, in the true spirit of the Vedas, one must see God everywhere. And the best way to get started is by actively getting involved in selfless service, that is, to see service to society as service to God. Thus it is that many decades ago, Swami launched the Sri Sathya Sai Seva or service organization, first on a national and soon on an international scale. When Baba introduced service as a mission objective, he told the service volunteers, Seva Dals as they were called, always perform your service, seeing God in the one whom you serve. And after completing your task, do not talk about how your service has benefited others. Instead, you should ask how performing the service has improved you. Over the years, Sai service has become truly global. You see Seva Dals regularly doing duty in Prashanti Nilayam throughout the year, especially at festival times. Sai service has also spread to all corners of India and indeed the world itself. Sai volunteers serve during normal times. And they are also available when disaster strikes. The unique thing about Baba's service organization is that every bit of service rendered has a spiritual basis.
What you are about to see is Gram Seva in Durban, inspired entirely by the Gram Seva done by Swami's students in villages around Prashanti Nilayam. The scenes speak for themselves.
O Lord of my being, Bhagawan Baba, I thank Thee for the opportunity to serve in Your name and consciousness. I undertake this seva as a sadhana. May it generate compassion. Inspire prema. And strengthen my faith and devotion in thee. Bhagawan Baba. I surrender myself. As your instrument. And dedicate this sadhana. At thy lotus feet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Service to mankind is service to God. But we've got to remember that Swami is omnipresent, he's omniscient, right? He's omnipotent. Okay? So he's everywhere, he's all the time, ever. There's no place he's not. So let us do it with joy, right? And let those who receive also be joyful, because we are giving a gift from Swami to Swami. Okay?
Today we're doing a Grama Seva program. We've planned this a few days ago, and this area there's a lot of needy people. It's one of the poverty-stricken areas. We've made up 350 amper packs made up of groceries, vegetable and blankets as well, which we're giving out to these people. And we want to continue this on a 3-monthly basis.
Om Namah Shivaya, Shivaya Namo. Om Namah Shivaya, Shivaya Namo.
Thanks very much. Excellent. God love us.
Okay, God love you very much.
Thanks.
So glad you
Om Sairam. Baba ni giveno with last round. Okay? Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Swami constantly reminds us that once we make a promise, we must never fail to keep it. Again and again, Swami himself gave a powerful demonstration of that teaching via personal examples. Remember the famous letter Baba wrote to his elder brother in May 1947? One of the promises Swami made was that he would remove suffering. Quietly and barely noticed, Baba started a free general hospital in Puttaparthi in 1957. The hospital had a small and humble beginning, but already it was sending a strong message, which was that practical spirituality begins with service to the poor and needy. Do you know that the very first doctor to be appointed served in an honorary capacity? Thus, right from the beginning, Swami clearly demonstrated that it is his divine attraction and pure love that would be the driver and the prime mover for all his projects. That was way back in 1957. More than half a century has passed, and during all that time, God on earth has never forgotten any one of his promises for even one single moment. He said he would give Ananda to all, and sure enough, he has been doing just that literally non-stop. He said he would lead people to the path of goodness and from spiritual darkness to light. By giving hundreds of discourses all over the place, Swami has been doing just that. And he promised to alleviate the suffering of the poor. Not for a moment has he forgotten that promise also. Whoever imagined that all this would happen way back in 1926 or in 1940, or for that matter, even in 1950, when Swami moved to his permanent headquarters? But they have all happened. How? Because Bhagawan tapped the infinite power within him, the power of God Almighty Himself manifesting as pure love.
People often say, "Oh, Sai Baba can do anything because he is God. We cannot be expected to be like him. We are different." Truly speaking, this is just an excuse for inaction. Yes, Sai Baba is God in human form. There is absolutely no question about it, because he himself has said so on many occasions. However, has he not told us so many times, in fact, that we too are God? He always tells us, "I know I am God, but you do not," and that is the only difference. Why is it that we are not aware of the fact that we too are God? That Swami has explained is because of our spiritual ignorance. And how do we get rid of that ignorance? By paying attention to the message of Bhagawan Baba and following his teachings as best as we can. Well, this month-long teleserial is mainly being brought to you to create an awareness of those precious teachings and also of the wonderful personal examples that Swami has set for the whole of humanity throughout his life. That is all for the introduction, and starting tomorrow, the focus would shift to the message proper. Please join us again tomorrow, and meanwhile, we do hope that you're enjoying our presentation. Thank you for being with us. Jai Sai Ram. Sai Ram, and welcome to the third episode in our serial presentation entitled Message of the Lord. This serial is being specially broadcast to help us all get spiritually tuned in preparation for our beloved Swami's 85th birthday. The first two episodes were mainly curtain raisers, largely meant to set the mood for what we are about to present starting today, which is mainly centered around Bhagawan Baba's teachings.
Let us begin by taking a look at how life treats different people. Some are very wealthy. The majority, of course, are not so wealthy. And some, in fact, are miserably poor. Nevertheless, the fact is that whether a person is rich or poor, hardly anyone is truly happy. Superficially, the wealthy do appear to be having a nice time. And by contrast, misery seems to be a constant companion of the poor. However, if you look closely, almost everyone, without exception, is full of anxiety and insecurity. Only the fears of the rich and of the poor are different. At the same time, there are a few people who seem to be quite happy all the time, without a care in the world. Why is there so much difference and variation? Some say that money is the key to happiness, and yet that does not really seem to be the case. At best, all that money seems to guarantee is temporary pleasure. What then is the secret of real happiness? For decades, Swami has been discussing precisely that. But unfortunately, few have been paying attention. So, let's make up for lost time and try to get a crash course on the essential aspects of Swami's teachings. These days, almost everyone, both the rich and the poor, is cut off from nature. It is all so crowded everywhere. In ancient times, this was not the case. People lived mostly in the open and communed freely with nature. And they often wondered, what are all these different things that I see around me? Where did they come from? Is there a purpose in all that exists, or none at all? If there is indeed a purpose, then what exactly is that purpose? Where did I come from? And how do I fit into all this? Is there any meaning and purpose to my life? And if so, what is it? Who determined that purpose and why? What is called knowledge emerged from the answers to questions like these. It is humans alone that have the special ability to reflect, ponder, inquire, investigate, reason, seek solutions, and to acquire knowledge. In other words, humans are unique because they have this amazing ability to be conscious of many things, including the universe and all that it contains. Since God is the source of the universe, everything that is in it, including our capacity to be aware and conscious, has naturally come from God. So, let us start with God Himself. God, the Creator, is abstract, formless and eternal, and is best described as the ultimate. And most religions emphatically proclaim that fact, no question about it. On the other hand, most devotees of Baba tend to think of God in terms of Swami alone. However, as Swami himself has told us any number of times, avatars are just the embodied form of the Supreme One, special forms though. In other words, an avatar is God with form, a form that He assumes for a specific purpose and for a limited time only. At the abstract level, Almighty God, the Supreme One, call Him what you will, is nothing but pure consciousness. That is why the Vedas declare Prajnanam Brahma, which literally means God is absolute or pure consciousness. Since God is pure consciousness, and since everything, including us, has come from Him, it is natural that some aspects of consciousness are present in creation also. However, consciousness is not visible to the eye, and we therefore cannot see it, nor can we detect it with instruments either. Consciousness is thus beyond the senses. That is the first lesson we must learn. Nevertheless, this consciousness is present everywhere in the universe. Further, its power is immanent in everything in the universe, from the cosmos to volcanoes, cyclones, avalanches, tigers, elephants, and even the tiny ant.
For all this, there is only one main cause.
You
find so many bulbs illumining. You can count, there are many. There's only one current that flows in all these bulbs. That current is the principle.
It is to remind us of that omnipresence of God that Swami often says, bulbs are many, but current is one. Jalaluddin Rumi is a famous Sufi poet who lived in the 13th century. In a poem describing how consciousness evolves in creation, Rumi says, I died a mineral and became a plant. I died a plant and rose an animal. I died an animal and I was a man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more shall I die to soar with blessed angels. But even from angelhood I must pass on. All except God perishes. When I have sacrificed my angel soul, I shall become that which no mind ever conceived. Oh, let me not exist, for non-existence proclaims, to him we shall return. The question now becomes, are we aware that we have come from God and that life in the human form has been given to us so that we may go back to God? I'm afraid that most of us do not know that. Baba adds that on the contrary, we waste our lives without even bothering to inquire about such matters. Which is why he often asks us various questions related to our true nature and also supplies the answers. Here is a sample. He asks, "Who are you?" And he gives the answer, "You are the Atma." He asks, "Where did you come from?" And he gives the answer, "From the Supreme Self." He asks, "Where are you supposed to go?" And he gives the answer, "Back to the Supreme Self." Baba then adds, knowing this truth, engage yourself in acts that would help you to enjoy the bliss of the Supreme, also known as the Supreme Self and as Atma. We start with the fact that God, as Swami tells us again and again, is omnipresent. That means consciousness is present everywhere in the universe, from the galaxies to the ant. As scholars declare, consciousness sleeps in a stone, stirs in a plant, awakens in an animal, and flowers in a human. What this means is that consciousness is passive in inanimate beings, but becomes active in living beings, though to different degrees. What is particularly important is that amongst all living beings, consciousness expresses itself best in humans. How it does so we shall see shortly. But for the moment, let us remember that human birth is really special because it is humans alone who can give the highest expression to the divinity latent within. By the way, that also is the reason why Swami often tells us that of all births, the human form is a rare privilege and special blessing.
The human being is really very lucky. Human life is so sacred. Of all the living creatures, human life is the rarest. This sacred human life is made unsacred.
The question now becomes, how and to what extent does consciousness flower in a human? Before we can consider the answer to this question, we need some background. Swami says that every human being is made up of three distinct entities, namely the gross body, the subtle mind, and the Atma, which is the cause for all. Where do all these come from? Let us start with the body. You and I would say that the body is made up of flesh, bones, blood, etc. Very true. But then flesh, blood, bones, etc. are made up of molecules of various kinds. And molecules, in turn, are made up of atoms. Okay, but where do these atoms come from? You know something? Every single atom in every human body can, in principle, be traced all the way back to the beginning of the universe, to the so-called Big Bang, with which the universe is supposed to have been born. By the way, this is not something I am making up. This is what modern science says. Thus, our body is verily connected to the beginning of creation. Since creation itself came from the Creator, we can say that our body really came from God. And you know what? Just to constantly remind us that we all came from Him, God has decided to make our heart His permanent residence. That is what Swami himself often tells us. Since Atma is just another name for God, and since God dwells within us, it means that Atma also is a part of us. From all this we learn that we not only have a body complete with senses and the brain, but also the Atma within us, of course. As a result, we can speak of not only bodily genes, but also of spiritual or divine genes. The difference is that while the physical or bodily genes come from the parents and through them from the ancestors, the divine genes come directly from God or Atma. It is by way of stressing this important fact that Swami sometimes addresses his devotees as Divyatma Swarupalara, meaning embodiments of the divine Atma. We are now left with the question, we also have a mind, don't we? Where does that come from? You are all aware that even animals have brains, which is a part of the gross body of the animal concerned. Thus, the rat has a brain, the monkey has a brain, elephant has a brain, and so on. The brain is very much like the CPU of a computer. Humans, who are the end product of biological evolution, have also a brain, a very powerful brain, in fact. But they also have something much more than a mere brain, and that something is the mind. It is difficult to describe the mind, but we all know that we have it. The mind is not merely the brain, as many think it to be. Rather, it is something extra that is subtle, and between the gross body and the causal Atma. One may thus think of it as interface between the body and the Atma, an interface that has evolved by the brain of the body and the Atma growing towards each other, shall I say? The mind is extremely powerful, especially since part of it has grown out of the Atma, so to speak. So powerful is the mind that in Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, among the senses, I am the mind, and in living beings, I am consciousness. It is this power of the mind, directly derived from the Atma, that helped humans to quickly rise above primitive existence and within a few thousand years to reach amazing heights. In fact, so high have humans soared that they have now begun to totally dominate the planet. Remember, all this happened because of the power endowed to the mind by God. Now, the mind is remarkable in that it can focus attention not only on the world outside, but also look within. Thus it is that the mind can ask, who am I? A question that Bhagawan Baba often raises and discusses in his discourses. To you and me, this question may sound strange. But when Swami is raising this question, what he is asking is the following. Of the three elements that make up your personality, namely the body, the mind, and the Atma, which of these do you identify yourself with?
You are not one person, but three. You are three.
The one you think you are physical body.
The one you think you are is a physical body.
The one others think you are mental body.
The one others think you are is mental.
The one you really are.
The one you really are is Atma, the spirit. You are the embodiment, personification of the spirit. You are not playing the
Body
body.
is like a water bubble.
Body is like a water bubble.
Mind is like a bad monkey.
Mind is like a
Don't
bad
follow
monkey.
the body. Don't follow the mind. Follow the conscience.
Don't follow the body, don't follow the mind, follow the conscience.
Adiyeni Swarupamu.
That is your true form.
Adiyeni Satyastamu.
That is truth.
Adiyeni Prematattvamu.
That is principle of God.
అలాంటి ప్రేమతత్వమైన సత్యస్వరూపాన్ని ఉంచుకొని ఎక్కడెక్కడో మనం ప్రయాణం చేస్తున్నాం.
Having been this truthful form in you, the form of the beast, you are in search of something elsewhere.
What does that mean? What does it mean to say that I am the Atma? What Swami means is that our feelings, thoughts, words and deeds must reflect the fact that the core of our personality is the Atma. To make us understand what exactly this means, Swami points out that a person who is dominated by his body and senses would be rather like an animal with a tendency to be angry, be cruel and so on. A person dominated by the mind, on the other hand, is likely to be clever, intelligent, creative, etc. But the mind-dominated person could also be aggressive, ambitious, cunning, unscrupulous, ruthless, and so on. In the worst case, the person could even be truly demonic. What about a person who is tuned to the Atma? How would that kind of person be? Swami has described that person also. Such a person would be kind, very loving, always compassionate, ever ready to help, always smiling, and so on. He would be the very embodiment of virtue and purity. Does that ring a bell? I am sure it does. Yes, that description reminds us of Swami himself, does it not? Of course it does. And that precisely is why Swami often tells us, your life should be my message. That is the simplest way of saying, love all, serve all. Do not even think of hurting a person. Always try to help and never be selfish, etc. We have heard all that so many times, and yet, how many people do we find who conform to these principles? Sadly, very few. And why is that? That's because the mind comes in the way and distracts our attention completely from Swami's teachings. As Swami often tells us, our mind can be a good friend and show us the way to God. On the other hand, that same mind can mislead us and hand us over to the devil. Thus, the mind can be a friend or a foe. If we are not careful, enemy is what the mind would become.
So, it all comes down to this. What exactly should we do in order to prevent the mind from turning against us and instead steer us towards God? Well, the answer is simple. Follow Swami's teachings. So now you know why we are presenting this special teleserial wherein we recall many things that Swami has been telling us all these years. And to proceed further, we must have some idea of how, if we are not careful, the mind can trick and mislead.
Let us say there is a tourist walking around in that part of a big city where there are many casinos, nightclubs and the like. The man sees a gambling den and feels the urge to go in and gamble, even though he does not have much money with him. This is what temptation is all about. Where exactly does this temptation come from? Baba says, temptation is a manifestation of a latent evil tendency lurking in the dark corners of the mind. That is where temptation hides like cockroaches do. Now, when do cockroaches come out of hiding? When it is dark and when there is no one around. In the same way, temptation shows its ugly face when there is the darkness of spiritual ignorance. So, our friend the tourist is pulled strongly by the temptation to gamble and perhaps even make some money. At the same time, something in him is sending strong warning signals not to fall for the temptation. There is thus a strong pull from two sides. What is the poor fellow to do? Swami says, what the man should do is simple. He must get in touch with his Atma within, and this connection he makes via the pipeline called Buddhi. He should ask the Atma, my mind is telling me to gamble. Should I or should I not? and whatever is the advice that the Atma gives, he should faithfully follow. Atma would of course say, "You fool, you have come to this city for a certain purpose. Do that job and do not get distracted by all these false attractions. They would only drag you to ruin." Incidentally, that is a reason why Swami says, always follow the master. Your conscience is your real master. Just to remind you, conscience, Atma, indweller, all these are just different ways of referring to Baba, who resides in our hearts. Let us go back for a moment to Buddhi, to which we made a reference. The simplest way of thinking of Buddhi is as a hotline to God within. Now, of course, you know that if the hotline is not kept in working condition, we cannot reach God when there is an emergency. That is pretty obvious. So, how does one keep this hotline in good working condition? Swami has the answer as always. He says, always avoid bad company. Avoid seeing what is bad. Avoid hearing what is bad. Avoid speaking what is bad. Avoid hurting others, no matter what the circumstance. Make sure you always feel good and think good. Make sure you always speak good and do good. Not very complicated rules, are they? But they must be followed strictly and regularly, remembering Swami would always be watching. Okay, one does all that. How does it help? In the following way. If you feel that mind might be misleading and tricking you, you can straight away dial the hotline and ask your conscience the following questions, describing what the mind is asking you to do. You then ask, is it right or is it wrong? Is it selfish or is it selfless? Is there any anger or jealousy involved? Is there any cheating or dishonesty involved? Will it harm anyone? Will it do good to others and make them happy? Finally, will God approve of what I am thinking of doing? If all these questions are asked in full sincerity and with the intention of staying true to Baba's teachings, you can bet that your conscience, which is nothing else but Swami himself seated in your heart, would guide you properly. So there it is. And now we come to the take-home lesson of the episode, which is, although we are made up of a body, the mind, and the Atma, our true nature is divine. Therefore, all our feelings, thoughts, words, and deeds must reflect the nature of the Atma in every possible way. In turn, this implies that all our actions must be in full conformity with Sathya and Dharma in all their aspects. As Swami would put it, your thought, word, and deed must be totally pure and have the full fragrance of my love.
And now that is possible only when Swami becomes the constant focus of our lives. And why should he not be, considering that he has showered so much love on us all the time? Think about it. Thank you for being with us in this episode, and we hope that you will certainly join us again for the next episode. Jai Sai Ram.
The fragrance of selfless love that has drawn the world into one family. The truth of an eternal message that has been revealed through every act and word. The fulfillment in service that has been taught by relentless sacrifice. The Lord's own life is indeed His message.
Sai Ram. and welcome to the special serial entitled The Message of the Lord. Today's episode being the fourth in the series. If you recall, the take-home lesson from the last episode was that every one of our actions, no matter what, must be in tune with our intrinsic Atmic nature. Maybe that sounds a bit complicated. Let us consider a simple analogy.
In India, there are two basic styles of classical music. Hindustani music, which is popular in the north, and Carnatic music, which is popular in the south. Central to both of these is an instrument called the tambura, which essentially supplies a drone and helps the musician to remain on key. When the musician sings or plays an instrument, the musician must not go off key. When music goes off key, here is how it sounds. That was not very pleasant, was it? It is the same sort of thing in life. Here, Sathya and Dharma are like the basic drone provided by the tambura. And no matter what the action is and who performs it, it must always be aligned to truth and righteousness. No one is exempt from the king to the pauper, and this applies 24/7, period. That's not very complicated, is it? By the way, this is a universal rule, and this same rule applies to all. That is precisely why Swami often tells us that there is no such thing as Indian truth, Pakistani truth, American truth, and so on.
సత్యం అనేటువంటిది అమెరికా సత్యము, జర్మనీ సత్యము, జపాన్ సత్యము, ఇండియా సత్యము, పాకిస్తాన్ సత్యము అనే సత్యములకు ప్రత్యేకత లేదు.
Truth cannot be divided as American truth, Indian truth, Pakistan truth or Chinese truth.
అన్ని దేశముల యందుకును సత్యం ఒక్కటే.
In all nations, truth is one.
అట్టి సత్య మార్గమును మనము దైవముగా విశ్వసించి మనం ఆరాధన చేయాలి.
Truth is to be recognized as God, and we have to.
ఈనాడు లోకములో ఇన్ని విధమైనటువంటి అవస్థలకు గురి కావటము, ఇన్ని పరిస్థితుల ప్రభావము లేచిపోవటము, దీనికంత మూల కారణము సత్యమును తప్పిపోవటమే మూల కారణం.
The main cause why the world is troubled, torn, and is undergoing so many adversities today is because we have forgotten truth.
The amazing thing is that though the basic principle is really very simple, in practice people hardly ever seem to remember it and follow the principle. And that is where all problems arise.
Why does one forget something that is so simple and not at all difficult to remember? But before that, there's an even more basic question. Why should I follow Sathya and Dharma? Why should I be true to the Atmic principle? Okay, the Atma is there within me, but what's so great about that?
So, why should you be in tune with the Atma? Swami gives the following answer. From God you have come, and to God you must return. Life is essentially a journey to God, no matter whether you are a teacher or a doctor or an engineer or even a businessman.
There is the answer. Life is really a journey back to God. And we obviously cannot reach God by following adharma, can we? So that takes care of the basic question why we must be true to our real nature, which is that of the Atma.
By the way, those of you who are familiar with Shakespeare's play Hamlet might remember that Polonius tells his son Laertes, "This, above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not be false to any man." Going back now to the first question about forgetfulness. If you remember, we discussed that last time. Basically, it is the mind which constantly tries to divert our attention from God. So, if we learn to keep the mind under check, then we can get on with the business of living life in a manner that would enable us to return to God who, by the way, is waiting anxiously for us to come back. Notwithstanding all that has been said, it is a fact of life that people do falter and are not always true to themselves. That is to say, there are invariably many lapses in the strict adherence to Sathya and Dharma during one's life. The question then arises, clearly, with a shaky track record like that, one cannot attain God at the end of one's life? Is that person's life a total waste? The answer is, not exactly. You see, during a given birth, there is always some positive progress towards God. However, the goal is not reached. The net result is that reunion with God is made through many lives, except perhaps in rare cases. Thus it is that there is a repeated cycle of births and deaths. That is to say, every birth is followed by death, which is then followed by a new birth, after which death comes again, and so on. In some respects, it is like going through school. A kid is admitted at the age of 5, say, in the lowest class of the school. Thereafter, the student has to work his or her way through class after class till he or she finally graduates from high school. In between, if the performance in a class is not good, the student may even have to repeat that class. Where spiritual evolution is concerned, progress is usually far more bumpy, rather like the stock market graph sometimes. Is there no end to all this? Is there no end to this at all? Does one keep going up and down endlessly? Of course there is an end. And a traditional Indian version of snakes and ladders gives a hint. What you see here is that unlike the usual snakes and ladders in the Indian version, which by the way is based on spirituality, after a certain stage one reaches a safe zone. Once one is in the safe zone, merger with God is only a matter of time. As one becomes more and more refined, God gives a helping hand to pull the person over to Him, rather like a mother bending down to lift a child that is on the ground and crying. Do you want God to give a helping hand real quick? No problem, for Swami has given a simple formula for that. In fact, if you remember, that is the very first thing he did on 20th October 1940 when he announced to the world that he was the avatar of this age. In a nutshell, Swami says, always think of me and constantly chant my name, and that should help you navigate safely through the storms life inevitably throws up. This is the simplest way of breaking the cycle of repeated births and deaths. If you think about it, it is all a bit strange really. I mean, here we are, constantly hailing Swami as God, and all the time he says, "My dear child, this is all you have to do to become one with me. In fact, I am waiting to extend my hand to you." But the sad thing is that you are making hardly any effort to come towards me. Why on earth is that? Here is Baba really trying hard to help us, and we don't want to grab his helping hand. Why? Swami himself has given the answer, and in brief it is that though we swear that we love Baba and all that, in truth we are really more attracted by the so-called goodies of the world than Swami's teachings. Swami explains it all as follows. He says, take a look at a really very young baby, just a few days old, say. Sometimes, for no apparent reason, the baby smiles. What is the baby smiling about? It is too young to know anything about the world, and yet it is smiling. The reason why the baby is smiling is because it is in touch with God from whom it has come. It is smiling because it is in communion with the Atma, which is its true nature. Do you understand? Do you follow? Swami continues, "O man, your true nature is the Atma, and Atma is bliss. So if you want to be happy, seek bliss, which would come to you only if you tune yourself to the Atma. But what do? The wrong thing. As a tiny baby, you seek me. But when you start growing up, you become fascinated by the world and start seeking happiness there. This starts in childhood, becomes a habit, and persists when you grow older. Result? God becomes a lower priority than the world because you think that the attractions of the world would give you more happiness than God.
God is always there, right? And He'll never go away. So what's the hurry to rush Him up? In the meanwhile, what's wrong if I have some fun?
That precisely is how humans land up in trouble. And once you are in trouble, you cry for me saying, "Oh Swami, where are you? Can't you see I'm in deep trouble? Why don't you help me?" And so on. My dear fellow, I was always there in your heart, but did you ever bother to give me even a tinku? Ask yourself that question first. So there it is. The next time we face difficulties and start blaming Swami for not taking care of us, we must first ask ourselves why we are having problems. The answer is simple. If we forget God and pay too much attention to the world, problems would come to us like a fly rushes towards a sweet. Swami warns us against all this by repeatedly telling us, "O man, deluded by an enemy called desire, who poses as a friend, you go after cheap imitations in the wide world outside. Transient happiness is outside, while bliss is inside. The mind would always drag you to the outside, while the Atma always welcomes you inside. Bliss can never come to you if you listen to your mind and wander outside. Listen to the voice of God within. Seek Him within, and you are sure to find bliss." So now the question becomes, how do I lead my regular life and yet maintain God focus? There are any number of ways of doing that, and in fact, Swami has mentioned many of them. For example, while going in a car, you can listen to bhajans and join the singing. You can try and help others and thus engage in service. This is another. Sometimes it becomes necessary to focus on one's job because that is important, like in the case of a pilot or surgeon. Obviously, when the surgeon is operating, he has to concentrate on what he is doing. And clearly, he cannot be focusing on chanting the name of Baba. However, Swami has given us a simple way out of this apparent difficulty. He says, "Just think of me before you start the surgery. Thereafter, you do your work the way you ought to. And when it is all over, just say a word of gratitude to God. That is all. If you do that, you would in fact be united with me throughout. And believe me, I shall see you through the most difficult of surgeries." And this formula can be adopted by anyone, including an airline pilot, for example. But you know something? All this calls for some strong willpower. And if you don't have it, and the mind can easily distract you. I know that people often say, "Oh, the mind is so difficult to control." Even Arjuna threw up his hands and complained about it to Krishna. And this is the Kali age. There are so many things that constantly draw our attention away. What are we to do? We are utterly helpless. Is this really true? Are we utterly helpless, as we often claim? Has not Swami told us again and again, "I am in you, below you, above you, behind you, before you," etc.? Has he also not told us repeatedly, "Why fear when I am here?" The question really is, how many are dead serious about following Swami's teachings? You know, when people really want to achieve something they think is important to them, they take enormous trouble. People do all sorts of things to get into the Guinness Book of Records. I do not know if you can quite see it, but here in this photo, a man is walking on a rope wire strung between the Twin Towers in New York before they came down on 11th September 2001. Take a look at the plane flying above. It is an awesome thing to try a feat like this. People do all sorts of things just to become famous. We are not criticizing such people, but merely trying to tell you that when a person is determined to do something, often that person is ready to sacrifice a lot to achieve that goal. So the question is, if one is ready to do all sorts of risky things just to become famous, why not do something that would not only please God, but also bring us closer to Him and to bliss?
करो मेरा साई प्रसन्न होगा साई मेरा मैं तेरा ये प्रेम की बहती धारा.
In short, if we are serious about loving Swami, then we must ask ourselves, as Baba wants us to, do I ever cry whenever people blatantly flout dharma? So the bottom line really is, deep in my heart, do I really ache for God? It is always easy to connect to Baba, no matter where one is. As he says, I am always available on call 24/7, no matter where you are. You do not need a laptop or a cell phone to contact me. My connection to you is heart to heart, and Om is my phone number. In fact, you can use any name of God and you are sure to reach me. And if you dial me with full faith, not partial faith and doubts, mind you, then be assured that I shall and will rush to your help.
That is the take-home lesson of this episode. God is our only true friend, and He's available on call 24/7, provided we place perfect and unconditional trust in Him. Well, that is all that we have for today. Thank you for being with us, and we do hope that you're enjoying our presentation. Do join us again tomorrow. Jai Sai Ram.
The fragrance of selfless love that has drawn the world into one family. The truth of an eternal message that has been revealed through every act and word. The fulfillment in service that has been taught by relentless sacrifice. The Lord's own life is indeed His message.
Sai Ram, and welcome to the 5th episode in our serial presentation entitled The Message of the Lord, that is being offered as a prelude to the forthcoming celebrations of the 85th anniversary of the avatar of the Kali age, who is none other than our beloved Swami. By way of setting stage for what is to follow, let me remind you that we are currently discussing the basics of spirituality. In the previous 2 episodes, we recalled the following.
True happiness is union with God. What passes for as pleasure, which we constantly seek, is transient and a poor substitute for bliss, which is really what we want and are entitled to. And we can be united with God only if we make it a habit to think of Him constantly. Today, let us start with the question, why did God create the universe? Fortunately for us, Swami himself has given the answer. The message is loud and clear. God created the universe as a stage and put us humans in it so that love manifests. Here we must understand that while God in the abstract is indeed pure love, for love to find expression, it needs a medium or an agency, if you prefer. Living beings can act as instruments, and indeed we do see lots of expression of love in the lower species. However, it is humans who are the best instruments for the expression of divine love, which is why God created humans. In other words, humans are really supposed to love each other and not hate each other, fight with each other, and so on. To put it differently, life is a divine drama with pure love as its theme. And although we do not know it, all of us are really actors in this drama. Naturally, the language that all actors are expected to speak in this divine drama is that of pure love. So you see, human birth has a very special purpose, which is why Swami often says, thus, the constant reminder from Swami is, human birth is special and privileged and is not to be wasted the way most of us tend to. Unfortunately, however, most people are not conscious of what God really expects of them. With the result, the divine drama does not play out the way it is supposed to. Basically, humans mess it up by replacing pure love with anger, hate, greed, conflict, war, and what have you. So, what has gone wrong? Did by any chance God write an imperfect script for His divine drama? Not really. God, being the supreme playwright and the ultimate director and producer, cannot be expected to make such elementary mistakes. On the contrary, He did something most unusual. First, He created the stage called the universe. And then He put the actors in it, that is to say, us humans. Now, the actors in a drama are normally given a script and asked to speak their lines according to it. However, God did it differently. He just said to humans, here is the stage, and you let the play evolve. Your basic guideline is that whatever you do must always be based on pure love. Let us see how you handle this challenge. So that was what God did. But things did not quite go the way they were supposed to.
What is it that equals the sun in its brightness? It is Vedam, the absolute changeless truth.
In the beginning, humans seemed to remember the instructions, and most people did base their actions on Sathya and Dharma. However, slowly but surely, humans began to forget the purpose for which God put them on earth. Indeed, even great sages felt tempted by the attractions of the world. there were also other things that made people forget the language of love. For example, the Mahabharata tells us that the Kauravas became very greedy and treated the Pandavas, grabbing their kingdom via a rigged game of dice. Since then, humans have got on to a huge slippery slope, so much so that these days things are rather bad most of the time. It is because humans quickly forget the instructions of God and get into all sorts of troubles that God incarnates in our midst from time to time in order to help us out. But we shall come to that a little later. Meanwhile, let us deal with the following question. Why do humans mess up God's play? How come they forget what God, the loving Father, has told them? The answer is that it is all due to the human mind. To understand why the mind deflects us from even obeying God's command, we must first try to understand something about its origin and nature. Let us start with animals and consider a rat, for example. The rat has a body, which includes, of course, the sense organs like the eyes, nose, ear, etc., and a brain. The rat has something more, which is life, and life comes straight from God or the Atma. Thus, schematically, a rat may be described as an entity with a gross body and a component of the Atma, which is the source of everything, including the entire universe. What about humans who have evolved from the lower species? In their case, there are similarities, but also important differences. Like the lower species, humans too have various sense organs and, of course, a brain, which, by the way, is quite remarkable. But it does not end there. Since humans were specially created by God to enact out His divine drama, they have something extra, which is the mind. In a sense, the mind is a frontier, that is the meeting place of, shall I say, the extension of the Atma on the one hand and the brain on the other. Having descended in a sense from the Atma, the mind is extraordinarily powerful. In fact, Krishna himself says so. It is because of this amazing power that humans are able to do so many amazing things. At the same time, having evolved from the lower species, the mind carries the imprint of a lot of animal behavior, such as anger, cruelty, and so on. In short, when humans try to play out God's instructions in the divine drama, what actually happens is decided by how the mind of every single human responds to two different forces. One force pulls the mind towards the world and all it has, while the other force tries to pull the mind towards God. The result in each case is determined by how much influence the heart exerts to counter the pull from the side of the external world. It is important to understand this point clearly, for this alone explains why some people are good and others are not so good. In the case of a person who is good, the influence of the heart is strong. It illumines the mind strongly. The result is that the good in the person is able to defeat the forces of evil within, and the individual emerges as a virtuous and spiritual person. If, on the other hand, the mind of the person gets polluted by the external attraction, then the negative forces lurking in the mind manage to shut out the light of wisdom and knowledge emanating from the heart. Eventually, the person becomes a cross between an animal and the devil. Some of you might have witnessed the Navaratri festival in Prashanti Nilayam, which usually occurs in the September-October period. The festival lasts 9 days and is in celebration of the Universal Mother who is worshipped during that period. Legend has it that Mother did penance for 9 days and after that purification was able to annihilate a demon called Mahishasura, who was half animal and half human. The message is that it is only through strict control of the senses and the mind that one can remove inner contamination, meaning animal and demonic tendencies, thus enabling the heart to illumine the mind. The problem these days is that the forces of negativity operating in the external world have become enormously strong and powerful. There are so many things to distract our mind. And the media, which is heavily funded by the forces of negativity, spares no effort in keeping us a slave to a lot of unwanted habits. As a result, our problems also have increased enormously. With such powerful negative forces around us, is it any wonder we often feel helpless? Nevertheless, the situation is not as hopeless as it might seem. For is not our beloved Swami here with us? In the Gita, Lord Krishna assures humans that whenever humanity is in distress, he would come back. And he has kept his promise. Not merely has the Lord come back as our dear Swami, but he also constantly reminds us, why fear when I am here? And if that is not enough, he also tells us again and again, I am in you, with you, above you, below you, around you. There are two important points to be noted in the above statement of Baba. Firstly, he is there right within us. That is to say, he dwells in the heart of everyone without exception. What it means is that the first place we must look for Swami is right in our heart. The second point about the statement of Swami mentioned earlier is that he is omnipresent. That is to say, he is everywhere, in everything, and all the time. That is something we should never forget. To stress the point that the heart of humans is the permanent residence of God, Swami sometimes recalls the story of Draupadi in distress. Just to remind you, after the Pandavas were defeated and lost everything in a fraudulent dice game against the evil Kauravas, Draupadi, the wife of the Pandavas, was dragged to the court to be publicly humiliated by disrobing.
ద్రౌపదికి పరాభవం జరుగుతున్న సమయంలో
when Draupadi was humiliated,
అనేక విధములుగా ప్రార్థించింది కృష్ణుణ్ణి.
she prayed Krishna in several ways.
ఆపద్బాంధవ, అనాథ రక్షక, బృందావన విహారి,
the one who goes around
గోకుల
Vrindavan.
సంచారి, ఈమెమో నామములంతా చెప్పింది.
She called God in several names. The one who belongs to Vrindavana, the one who stays in Gokula.
కృష్ణుడు రాలేదు, ఆమె యొక్క ఆపత్తును సంరక్షించలేదు.
Krishna did not respond. He didn't come to her rescue.
కడపటికి అలసిపోయింది, కూలిపోతూ
she was just falling on the ground.
హృదయవాసి అనింది.
Ultimately said,
భగవంతుడు ప్రత్యక్షమయ్యాడు.
she said, Hridayavasi, indweller in my heart, God manifested there.
ద్రౌపది కృష్ణుడిని ప్రశ్నించింది.
Draupadi questioned Krishna.
కృష్ణ,
ఓ కృష్ణ,
ఎన్నో పర్యాయం నేను ప్రార్థించినప్పుడు అందు రాలేదు.
I prayed to you repeatedly. You did not respond.
కానీ
but
నేను కూలిపోయే సమయంలో పిలిచినప్పుడు తక్షణమే వచ్చావు.
I was about to collapse, fall. You manifested there.
కారణం ఏమిటి?
What is the reason?
ఇది భక్తులకు అందరికీ సరైన జవాబు.
Now this answer is appropriate to all devotees now.
ద్రౌపది,
O Draupadi,
నన్ను బృందావన విహారి అన్నావు.
you call me as Brindavana Vihari.
నీలో ఉన్నటువంటి నేను తిరిగి బృందావనం పోయి మరిగి రావాలి నేను.
When you call me Brindavana Vihari, I must go to Brindavan and reach here.
లేకపోతే నీ మాటకి ఏమాత్రం సత్యం ఉండదు.
Because your statement will not be true if I act otherwise.
మధురాపుర సంచారి అన్నావు.
You said Madhurapura Sanchari.
దగ్గర ఉన్నటువంటి వాడిని నేను మధురకు పోవాలి, నేను రావాలి.
So I am so near, but I have to reach you via Madhura. Therefore, it is a difficult task.
హృదయవాసిని నేను.
I am present in your heart.
ఏ క్షణంలో నన్ను స్మరించినప్పటికీ నేను సిద్ధంగా ఉంటాను.
You may think of me any moment. I am ever ready.
కనుక నీవు లోపలనే స్మరించు.
You think of me within.
మనసుతో స్మరించు.
Think of me
హృదయంతో వరించు.
wholeheartedly.
ఇది నీ యొక్క ప్రార్థన యొక్క సరైన జవాబు.
This is the proper way to pray, and this is the answer.
The story is fictional, no doubt. But Swami narrated it just to stress that we seldom look for God where He really is, right within us. That is a point we shall come back to maybe later, but for the moment there is another issue that must be addressed. The role and the importance of buddhi. People ask, if God is right within us, then how come many a time He hardly responds when we cry out even loudly? The reason for this is simple. The mind is linked to the heart via a hotline called the buddhi. If this line is not working properly, then God would not be able to speak to us when we are straying from the path of Sathya and Dharma. It is when such a breakdown happens that the voice of conscience is not heard. Clearly, such breakdown or malfunction of buddhi is not desirable and must be avoided at all costs. And the best way of achieving that is through proper and routine maintenance. In other words, if buddhi is kept in working order, then whenever we call out, God would be able to hear our pleas immediately. So you see, keeping buddhi in good condition helps both ways. Firstly, God can advise us when we go wrong, and likewise, when we cry out to God in times of distress, He too can hear us loud and clear. Thus the question boils down to how to do maintenance on the emergency line to God called buddhi. We shall take that up next time, but meanwhile, let me point out that our job has been made easy because Swami has given the entire maintenance procedure. How lucky we are that God in human form is here now in our midst, helping us so much and in so many different ways too. Offering our deep gratitude to Him, let us wind up with a take-home lesson for the day, which is, God is omnipresent and thus everywhere, in every being, all the time. However, the best place to look for Him is within our own heart, which, as Swami says, is His permanent address.
All that we have to do is call out to Him. But our cry of anguish must be like that of a calf that has lost its mother. God is in our heart all the time and is available 24/7. But to reach Him, we must keep the hotline called buddhi in good condition. That's all that we have for this episode. Thank you for being with us, and do join us again tomorrow. Jai Sai Ram.